afternoon, everyone. So once again, the purpose or topic of today's session is really what's around, what's coming in the Release 22 update that just came out. From a high-level agenda, I'll do some high-level introductions, overview of those enhancements in Release 22. And the majority of today's sessions is going to be me inside of JD Edwards. I think it's usually more beneficial to get out of PowerPoint and show you kind of how things work. So we'll be diving into some of the key features that I feel that are really going to be monumental shifts in terms of how people leverage the tool. So that's going to be today. Just jumping through some quick introductions. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Brian Rose. I'm VP of the JD Edwards practice here at Trillium. I've been at Trillium for about 10 years now and have started with a lot of this UX1 orchestrator stuff when it first came out in the 2014, 2015 timeframe. So it's been really incredible to see the growth and the amount of enhancements that have come with the tools. So, every single time a new release comes out, more and more technology is coming along with it. So it's been great. Just from a high level perspective of those that don't know Trillium, we've been around for almost 30 years now, 200 full-time employees really across the entire United States. We've helped almost over 700 clients around their different ERP projects, whether they're upgrades or implementations or process improvements. And then here's just kind of a quick list of some of the customers that we've helped. Maybe some of the people on this call are on this logo, but just wanted to give everyone just kind of a quick introduction of who Trillium is if you didn't know. So now let's jump really into the meat of today. So talking about the overview of the enhancements that have come with that Release 23. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but for those that aren't really aware of the new naming convention, so every year kind of a major release is going to be introduced. So the R22 was the first naming convention change, and that happened last year. And now this is Release 23. So it's, from our understanding, just going to be continuously growing. Release 24 sometime late next year with small kind of incremental changes throughout the year to where they're not monumental shifts, but they will allow you to kind of gather and utilize the different improved technologies. So Release 23 is the 9.2.7 tools and just came out in the October-November timeframe. So it's still fairly new. We do see some customers already moving to it, but it is fairly new. Now, when we think of kind of the different areas of Release 23, and I always like to break out the releases in two kind of key differentiating ways. So there's the application side, and then there's more of the technology side. So when I think of the technology side, the digital transformation, the orchestrator, the notifications, logic extensions, right? All of those different areas, which really can be leveraged across any application inside of E1. But they are, Oracle is still coming out with new features and functions around applications. I've broken these out into the kind of the three key cogs that we like to think of when we refer to JDE, which is the manufacturing, finance, and distribution sides. Some of these are pretty neat. When we think of the ability to do substitute components on the work order print, that's nice. There's going to be some new functionality around the address book map, which is a view where you can put in kind of a geographical range on the map, and it'll show all the customers that you have in there. Same thing with allowing you to do attachments at the line of business level. So if you do use line of business inside of your organization, now you're going to be able to add attachments to it. There is some AP automation, voucher matching technology that has come out, which helps with some of the vendor invoices and automation. It's still not OCR or anything like that, but it is giving some different feature functionality to help in that area. And then when we get into the distribution side, there's some new functionality to help from an EDI perspective, and then also inside of the rebates management. Now, all of this or many of it is based on the processing options associated to these. So when you think of the first one option to print component item substitutes, that'd be, updating the processing options on the R31410. The default work order routing operations, that's going into the receipts application and also into the work order routing. So these are just really flags that we need to switch inside of the organization. They're not huge kind of shifts or things that would be massive to take on. So these are the high level application updates that came with the new release. And this gets in more of the tool side of it, like I talked about. So breaking this into two key areas, so digital transformation and system automation. System automation to me is more around kind of the back-end CNC functionality. So the ability to do updates on the web client, a web OMW, spec object report, doing some publishing of batch information for APIs. So those get more on the back-end CNC architecture areas, whereas the tools in the digital transformation area are more around how do we improve or enhance the technology for the business users or even the functional technical IT team, right? So this is our orchestrator, our logic extensions, our ability to manage files more easily. And even they came out with a password reset, which it's such a simple kind of add to the tool, but it's beneficial, right? And it's kind of getting IT out of the having to manage passwords and resetting passwords and letting the end users work through that. So these are more of where I think the power is going, right? When we think of leveraging the tools to enhance the business. And I'm going to be diving mostly into these around the digital transformation functions today. So just jumping into the demonstration, this is going to be the areas that I'm going to be covering. And like I said, I don't want to spend a ton of time inside of PowerPoint. I'd rather go in and show you guys how the functionality works inside of E1. So the first thing is I'll be showing you just that password reset self-service, what kind of it looks like, give you a little bit of a view of the email that you get when you're running through that. Then we'll jump into the next two, which will be around logic extensions. So the first one is going to be being able to call those without an orchestration, so calling them directly from a form extension inside of E1. Same thing with the new aggregation ability in logic extension. So if you're trying to aggregate data to be used in a future step in an orchestration or whatever it might be, that has now been kind of employed in the new tools. And then the last two are going to be around file management in one way or the other. So the first one is going to show kind of a simplified way where you can grab attachments, whether they're Excel, JPEG, Word, whatever they might be, right, and associate those to a record via an orchestration associated on an E1 page. Same thing when we get into the realm of managing files is getting that output from an E1 page. So going in, putting in my values, running the file, and then having it drop in Excel. So kind of managing that process, and it has a really neat drag and drop capability where I can just grab a file from a folder, drag it into E1, and process it. So there's some really cool stuff that we're going to be working through today. So now that we've talked through just a high-level overview of the tools, some of the enhancements around it, I'm going to now jump into E1. Okay, so I'm going to assume that everyone can see JD Edwards. So this current release I'm on right now is that latest and greatest. It's the 927 release. And the first thing that you're going to notice when I log in is there's this new little guy here, which is your reset password. So if I click on this reset password, what it's going to ultimately end up doing is just saying, hey, what's your user ID? And then whatever the ID email is associated to it, it's going to send you an email. So if I come in here and I'll show you what this email looks like, it's going to send me an email and say, hey, Brian, you requested, right, to do a, you requested to update your password, and it'll send you this URL. It does remain active for only 15 minutes. So if you don't hit it in the first 15 minutes, it's not going to be active anymore, but you can always go back to that reset password and hit that URL again. This is very similar to me in terms of, I just got a chat. It talks about audio issues. We having any audio issues?
Hey, Brian, this is Laura. I don't think that we are because we just had one person ask a question about their audio. So I just asked for them to switch over to Chrome.
Okay, all right, great. Sorry, I didn't want to keep talking if no one could hear what I was saying. So you will get this email, which what I was going to say is very similar to what you would get if you forgot your 365 password or your whatever the password is for the service that you're using, your Chase Bank, and it will send you this URL. Once you go through and click on this URL, it'll bring it into where you then go and put in a new password, and you will be prompted to say, hey, your account has been reset successfully, blah, blah, blah. So once again, instead of IT having to manage this internally, they can just have the end users reset their passwords whenever that needs to happen. So when their password expires, or if they forgot their password, or whatever the situation is, IT doesn't have to be the one who is maintaining that. So let's jump back into E1. Okay. Okay, so the first piece we're going to talk about inside of the tools today is the ability to call a logic extension directly from an application, right? So this is where I am going to a some type of app, whether it's sales order entry, work order entry, whatever it might be, and leveraging the form extension to associate a mechanism or a process behind the click. And in the past, this used to be things like notifications and orchestrations, which were obviously great. Now there's been some new flexibility added, which you can associate logic extensions. So the key kind of differentiators, you don't have to use or embed an orchestration anymore. You can just go directly to kind of that back-end logic extension. It reminds me of kind of creating a business function, right? You're going and you're directly having that logic be run without having to leverage the orchestrator. So to show you an example of where this could come into play, I'm just going to go into sales order entry right now. So the use case is going to be, I want to have the promised shipped or promised delivery date calculated to be always 5 days greater than my request date, right? So I put in my request date, whatever that request date is, I want to run a logic extension which automatically grabs that value and puts a buffer of 5 days associated to it, right? This could be a situation where maybe by the time it gets requested, you want to backdate that, right? To say, hey, this is when they requested it. We want to backdate this because we know it takes a couple of days to get through the shipping department, or we know X amount of time it takes from a logistics to get to this customer. So those are some different kind of situations that would possibly come into play. So if I jump into, I'm just going to grab an order here, 15477. Let's go ahead and jump into this line. Okay, so you're going to see that there's this button here, right? And that's really not new to anyone, I would imagine, right? This is the ability to add that button to the application via a form extension. So that's this guy right here. So if I click into this form extension, and once it loads up, I'm going to now go into my associate orchestrations, okay? So in this associate orchestrations, this is where you will see a little bit of a difference, right? So in the past, it's always been either an orchestration or a notification. Now I can go directly in and associate it to a logic extension, okay? So if I come into this logic extension, it's going to look very similar to what the orchestrator notification was. So it's going to say, what is the click, right? That is the mechanism or the trigger for this individual process. What logic extension do you want to go in and grab? So I'm pulling this logic extension, which is the update delivery date, defining my inputs, right? So I'm defining, I want to do a number of 5 days, and I want to pass those or calculate that based on my requested date. And then the execution and the defined outputs, once again, are very similar. But it's associating the event, right? What is the click? What is the trigger? What do I want to do, right? What logic extensions do I want to specifically call? Mapping those inputs, whether they're from an input to an output. And actually, I'm going to come in here. This is the output I'm calculating. So I'm saying based on my requested date, my 5-day buffer, I want to increase my date by 5 specific days, and I want you to update the promise delivery field. Okay, so this is me, once again, grabbing the information on the grid, associating it and doing some logic behind the scenes, and then updating a promise delivery date. So if I were to come back in here, close out. Now I could do this, right now it's more just to kind of show you an example, but I could say anytime I update this field, right, run the logic extension. The triggers of how you can kick these off is really dependent on whatever your needs are. But for this specific example, what I would go in and do is I'm going to go ahead and update my date. Click on this line. And you'll see it automatically calculated that +5 date to the promise delivery. And I could do this for 100 rows, whatever the number is, right? Or I can have it automatically be done whenever an update is made to that requested date. But this is, once again, just an example of how you can go directly to that logic extension versus having to embed it in an orchestration. And logic extensions, I would say, do become sometimes more of an IT type of function. It's very technical in nature at times. So may not be applicable to everyone, but for those who are using logic extensions, you have this capability to build this out. And I'm not going to show you kind of the back-end build out of every one of these. I will walk through the document management piece of how we build those and the process. So just from a time perspective, we wouldn't be able to get through everything. Okay, so now we've gone through the example of calling a logic extension directly from a form extension. Now I'm going to jump into the Orchestrator Studio and talk through the aggregation support or the aggregation options you have with the newer tools. So this is my Orchestration Studio. Not going to go into detail here, right? But all the green areas are my components, and then my orchestration or my workflows are different ways which allow me to kind of bundle those all up together to do different types of features. So the logic extension here, and once again, this is a little bit more, I would say, of a technical exercise, but this here, what the use case is I want to go out and determine what customer items have been my largest sellers, right? So I'm going in and aggregating data based on the order type, summing a specific quantity, right? I want to only be looking at quantities that are over 1,000, right? So I'm summing up a value to say, hey, only show me these that are over 1,000. And I want to group it by the description and the item or the product name. And I want to order it from highest to lowest. So all of that kind of aggregation is similar to what you could do in a data request in Orchestrator. You could now do that inside of this logic extension. So this is kind of the build out of, and not once again to get too far into the details, but if I jump into this aggregation in this editing field, it's going to feel very similar to that data request, right? So the data request that you can do inside of the orchestrations. This is looking very similar, right? What am I filtering based on? What am I aggregating? So I'm aggregating based on my total ordered quantity. I want to only see values that are over this 10,000 number, group them by a specific values, and then also highest to lowest. So this is giving me that ability to grab all this aggregated information and make decisions on it, maybe in future steps of an orchestration, or just sending me maybe an output every morning of everything that's kind of going on. So with this one, if I do want to come in and just do a quick test, I can just run this test, and what you'll see in my output is it's showing my product name, right? My total order count, and what my total ordered quantity is. So all that mapping that I just showed you in the background, aggregating the data based on a specific product name, getting an order count, also a total quantity ordered count, grouping them from just highest to lowest. All of that can be built out. And this is an example of an output then you can take as an array and pass to an orchestration step. So I could maybe take these values, pass them into another step, and send out a notification or whatever it might be. But that aggregation support was not something that you were able to do in the earlier releases. Okay, so that has gone through kind of the logic extension updates. There were some other logic extension updates as well around data sets. So we won't be able to go through that today, but if you have time, I certainly would recommend checking that out. Logic extensions is really the way, in my opinion, for the non-coding, JRuby or Groovy script resource to be able to kind of create some more custom functionality. And a lot of what you see in it is similar to what you would see in a standard development, right? If else, table IOs, hitting a business function, hitting workflows, all of those types of things. And you can build this out in whichever way makes the most sense for you. All right, so the next one I'm going to jump into is around, the next two are somewhat coupled. So they are around file, I would say file management or document management in one way or the other. The first one is going to be being able to drop a document inside of an E1 page and have it go and be attached to a work order. The other one is going to be a situation where I am putting in a specific value and wanting to pull out an Excel or CSV document. So before I show you kind of the process of how to build it, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an understanding of what it kind of looks like. Internet is crazy slow today. All right, so these are really the two buttons that we're going to be talking about today. So the first one is reporting a broken piece of equipment, to where I'm creating a work order and also associating an attachment to it. And the other one is a listing of all the equipment that are currently down. So both of these are somewhat in the CMMS CAM wheelhouse, but they can be applicable across anything, right? Whether I'm associating an attachment to a sales order or a discrete work order or a purchase order, blah, blah, blah. All of those can be associated the same way. So this report broken equipment is an example where if I were to click on this, it's going to pull up some inputs for me to add. Okay. So once this loads up, okay, so in here, I'm going to be putting my equipment number and the problem description. And one of the things that you'll notice too is there is this file inputs option, right? So this allows me to drag and drop a file or select a file to be associated to this specific work order that is being created. So I would come in and first put in my piece of equipment, say machine down, whatever it might be, right? And then I come in here to my file inputs and I drag a picture of the issue. Click OK. And that will run an orchestration which creates a work order, right? So you can see over here 504-241 has been created for this specific piece of equipment, and it also associates that attachment to that work order. So I can drag a document and then associate it to a individual work order. Same type of thing if I want to grab a document, consume it in update fields, right? You can kind of do that the same way. So this is really neat because now I can drag files, bring them in. You can, like you see in here, utilize the success message field on the back end to bring the view up just to show you kind of what's been done, or if any errors may have happened during the processing, those will all show. So this is me grabbing that document and consuming it inside of E1. Now, if I want to do more of a situation where I want to generate a document, so this document, this is just going through and saying, I want to look for anything that's at a down status. When I click OK, that will run. And it will automatically generate a file. So this allows me to then download this file, pull it up in Excel, and show all of the assets or pieces of equipment that are down. So one example was me grabbing a file and putting it somewhere. The other one was me going and grabbing data and then pulling that out into a document. All right, so now let's walk through just some of the high-level steps of kind of building out this first example, right? So this report broken equipment example. So the first, and to build these out, you're really coupling a couple of different functions together, right? So I'm leveraging a process recorder to capture my form requests or my service request. I'm then going into orchestration associating my attachment. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into this work order entry application. And I'm just going to go through all the steps that I normally would to create a work order. Now, before I do that, I'm going to record a process, click start. So now we go through all the clicks, put in my unit number, 34711, save failure, whatever it might be, save and exit. And when I do that, it generated a order number. So I want to grab that. Okay, so now that I've created my work order, I have associated or pulled back my order number. Let's go ahead and stop. And I'm just going to call this broken equipment. So once that saves, Now I can go ahead and jump into my Orchestrator Studio, and that is building out a form request. So this went in and generated all the steps it took me to build out this individual order, right? From clicking the add button to coming in and doing all of the different areas in terms of my asset. And I'm just going to name, I'm just going to update the namings on these to make them a little bit more friendly. Just call this failure issue. Clean it up, right? Asset. Save it. Now this is just me building out the steps to create the work order, right? Nothing around me grabbing the document, putting it where it needs to go. But to do that, the next piece is associating this to an orchestration. And one of the things that came out in an earlier release, but I really love it, is just this ability to auto-create orchestrations from a form request. You know, in the past, what you'd have to do is go into the orchestration, click the add, then add it from there. This is really nice because it also builds out all of the inputs. So all the inputs and mappings get automatically generated. So if I come up here, you'll see it brings over the asset and the failure issue and associate those in this specific orchestration. All right, so now once this saves, the first step is really done, right? So the process of me being able to create a work order is done. Now I need to be able to associate a attachment to that individual order. So to do that, where we start is inside of my inputs and values. So these are the standard inputs, right? When we think of an orchestration, we have our asset and our failure. Now we want to get into our file inputs. So we can do two different ways, or three different really. We can say there's no file inputs. We want to process each file individually, or we want to process them as an array. For today's example, I'm just going to say I want to process them individually. I'm going to go ahead and just say overwrite any existing files. And then we just need to create our file name pattern. So based on the type of document that you're dropping, right? If it's going to be a JPEG or it's going to be an XL, I'm just going to come in here and do this for the JPEG. Give it a content type. I'm just going to call this image and then save. So if I come back here, you'll see I have my file inputs, kind of the format built out. Now I need to bring in the orchestration step, which takes that attachment and associates it to a specific area, right? So to do that, I come into my design mode, I click the add button. I'm going to do a attachment. I'm just going to do new. Call this upload picture. Put in the structure type. And then I'm just going to update the key value to work order just to make it a little bit simpler. When I say this now, I'm going to upload a file, right? And then my file name is just going to be that image like you saw earlier. So this is how I'm going to be mapping that information over. Then I'm going to click save. So now that I have done that mapping, I've done my ability to create my piece of equipment, also the uploading of the picture. I'm now going to just get out of design mode, do my mapping, and there's going to be two things I have to map. The first one is going to be my order number, right? Because I need to associate which order number this needs to be associated to. And then the last one is going to be the image. And if you do want to kind of build out a specific messages output, you can add that to the success area, right? So if I want to come and say the work order that was created and blah, 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 but just for time's sake today, I'm not going to build that out. But what's nice about this too is you can kind of add, it'll add these variables for you, where you can say if you want to put an asset number or failure or whatever it might be. Same thing on any of the warnings or error messages that are associated to it. So pretty neat of how you can kind of bring that data back to the resource that is using JDE on the glass. All right, so now that we've built that out, let's talk through how do we associate this to a orchestration step, or sorry, to a E1 page. Okay, so once this loads up, come into my managed content and my compose pages. All right, so this is that same page, which allows me to kind of add any buttons that I want. If I want to come in and add this orchestration to my compose page, I would just click the add button, come into the drop down and pick orchestration. Once I get my little gear, I come in and I select the orchestration that I want to associate to it. And this is where that mapping comes in, right? So I'm saying I want to map the asset, I want to map the failure issue. If I did want to pop back that message we talked about where we put in kind of a user-centric value or field to give them some feedback, that would allow us to kind of save that message. Save, call it broken equipment. Put that back out. And if I were to click into it, there we go, right? Asset, failure, and because I have my inputs associated to it, then I get my inputs toggle option. And the inputs doesn't have to be just a single input, meaning, or the file doesn't need to be just a single file. I could grab multiple pictures and associate them all at the same time. For today's example, it's just doing a single one, but you do absolutely have the ability to do as many different attachments as you may want to add. So that's how we go through the process of grabbing the information and easily creating, whether it's an order, and associating a file to it. Now let's talk through how we would receive a file, right, or generate a file and be able to give it to that end user. So the process is fairly similar when we think of starting it, right? So the first thing would be for us to do something like a process recording. So if I go to P1701, this is a listing or my equipment master. And let's just say for today's example, I want to pull back everything that is in a equipment status of down. And we could do this multiple ways, right? We could do logic extension, we could do a data request. This is going to be doing it in a form request. It's really based on how the organization normally approaches this, but this one's fairly simple. I record a process, start, I go through and do down. It gives me my 9 values, and then I select which fields I want to bring back. I should say we do those. Zoom, stop, down, equipment. Okay. So once my form requests up, look up down equipment. We're just going to have status. And this one, once again, is fairly simple. It's just a single step, going and grabbing that information. Like we did in the last one, I'm going to create my orchestration. Now, where the difference kind of comes into play is in the last example, we were using a file as an input. Right now, we're really using it more as an output. So I'm going to go ahead just quickly and jump into my outputs. So I need to first return all grid rows. And do this one as well. So in this return all grid rows, this is where it allows me to output these grids to a file, right? So I can output these grids to a file, say what type of file do I want to output, and that is what really grabs the specific information that I want to be brought out to that end user. And I will say this can be finicky at times. All right, it's not liking me saving this right now, but when I do associate this to my output and bring it to a overwriting of an existing file, what I do from there is then I go in and determine how I want these files to be processed. So I would come in here to my files, determine which ones I want to process, right? And then build those out of what the file name is. Now, I can generate these as a single file. I can generate a zip file. This is mostly, once again, for an example of grabbing the information and supplying it in the E1 page. But a lot of people use this for integrations as well. Many integrations we see are flat file based, and I want to be able to consume files or even export files or generate files. This is exactly how you'd be able to do it. And the process of how you would associate this to the individual E1 page is exactly the same, right? So I don't want to walk through that again, but going in, adding it to the composed page, adding a button, associating that orchestration inside of it and the inputs, and then running it. So it's very, very simple to build out. The last thing I wanted to show quickly is inside of workflows. And workflow has been, I think, gaining, I would say gaining a little bit of usage. It was kind of tricky to use in the past. It's getting a little bit easier, but what I wanted to show is now in workflow, you can call orchestrations and notifications. So you couldn't do that in the past. Now you can call those. So you'll see these little buttons here are this is an orchestration and this is a notification. And this, to me, just kind of opens the doors of allowing people to be notified via a notification versus having to go to the workflow kind of manager. That's one of the bigger reasons why most people don't use the workflow is the manager's kind of clunky. But by using orchestrations and notifications on top of that, it makes that process much easier. So in the workflow management, you can now call orchestrations and notifications in the process. All right, so let's go ahead and jump back just quickly. All right, so one, if you guys want to connect with us, please feel free to reach out. Also, Blueprint 4D is coming up. I got an email today. It's about 5-ish months away. So the call for presentations open. So if you want to go in and do some presentations to get out there, I would certainly recommend it. It's in Dallas this year. It was in Vegas last year. So I know I'm looking forward to getting down to the Texas area. Well, thank you guys for the time today. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and have a great rest of your week.